I'm going to be your moderator. What we have is a Fayetteville Government Channel roundtable discussion. The object of what we're doing today is to give members of the Telecom Board a chance to talk a little bit more about the duties and purposes of the board itself and to introduce themselves and let them clarify some of what they do and what their responsibilities are. And at the same time, let those of you watching us today know a little bit more about the actual purpose of the Telecommunications Board. And again, I've introduced myself. We're going to start off now to my left with Gary and have each of you go through and introduce yourselves in turn.
I'm Gary Cochran. I'm the newest member of the Telecom Board, I guess, and I joined about 60 days ago. I'm a Northwest Arkansas native and a Fayetteville lover, and I wanted to get involved just to participate in some of the community affairs and to exercise a bit of my techno geekness with the Telecommunications Board.
I'm Susan Cromwell, and I'm probably the oldest member of the Telecommunications Board, I suppose, but not that old. This is my second year on the Telecommunications Board. I serve in the community as the Director of Technology for the Public School District, and our interests are wide and varied with respect to infrastructure in our town and interest in maintaining close ties with school progress and city progress in telecommunications infrastructure. And I'm just generally a busybody and like to be involved in all kinds of things. So.
I'm Jim Bemis, Telecommunications Board Emeritus. I think of myself as a flywheel. Some people call me a gadfly, but I hope I serve a role as bridging between and among the Telecom Board members.
I'm David A. Young. I'm a teacher at Fayetteville High School, and I'm on assignment this year as teacher in residence with the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. I've been involved with public access for a long time, and I'm a teacher and have used video in my classes, and so I came on the board in April, and I think, and just here to have our say said.
I'm Craig Brown. I work at the University of Arkansas. I'm responsible for their campus network. I got involved with things related to this back when there was a working group trying to establish an institutional network as part of the Cox franchise renewal. And when the cable board got changed to a telecommunications board, I became interested in getting involved for those things other than cable services that telecommunications can mean.
Stephen Smith. I'm on the faculty of communication at the university, and among my primary teaching research interests are in telecommunication policy with an emphasis on trying to assure citizen access to the media, both as senders and receivers of messages.
There we have it. We've introduced everybody, and the way we're going to do this in the spirit of commercial television is there's not going to be any rules. Just chime in when you feel like doing it. We'll kind of put the questions on the table and have a discussion. And let's start out today with telling everybody a little bit about how does somebody actually become a member of the Telecom Board, and what exactly are the qualifications? And maybe, Jim, you've been there in the past. What does it take?
Well, they keep, I think, changing the board. I guess you'd call it the focus, and I think that's changed in my time. It used to be called the Cable Board, and now it's the Telecommunications Board, and I don't know what it will be in the future. We have this task force coming along, so I think it's changing. They do have some current regulations or I guess guidelines, but I don't know what they are.
I can speak to that. When the ordinance changed last summer, when Alderman Marr and Jordan chaired an ad hoc committee to review the ordinance and to make appropriate changes, they did tighten up the membership requirements to ask for expertise in either telecommunications or television public policy around those issues and communication services in general.
So what's the process that one goes through to actually become a board member?
What I did was I submitted an application, and then I was called in for an interview, and then they told me to come to the meetings. So, but I don't know if that's changed.
No, it's the city council's nominating committee accepts the applications and then interviews and names.
So it's just like a regular job. You go through the interview process, and they vet you before you become part of the board.
Right. There is an additional requirement. You have to be a Fayetteville resident for at least 6 months.
Thank you.
Good point. We don't want to leave that one out. So once you're there, you're on the board. How do all of you determine and set the agenda for your meetings?
Well, part of it is we have some agenda items that are just carried from one month to the other, so there's at least some uniformity in what we're discussing, and then the other agenda items are set based upon what comes up during the meetings or sometimes throughout the month. We're pretty active with email correspondence with each other between meetings, and so when something that seems to need to be addressed comes up, we usually get it added to the agenda.
What are some of the things you're looking at the time we were taping this?
Well, I'll start. Our running items, our agenda items, revolve around current franchise negotiation issues. We're reviewing PEG channel policies, both the public access, the government, and the education channel policies. We have other topics that we're studying, looking to the city administration to help us resurrect other franchise negotiations with other companies that we want to review in addition to the cable franchise. Others?
We have the website committee that we were working on.
Right.
Some policy there, and then we've been pretty consumed with the new ordinance, and then this telecommunications group that we were doing. But that's basically where we've been.
And the new task force. That's what.
So maybe a finer point: if somebody's watching this, if somebody's watching anything that's on cable access, and they've got a criticism, maybe a comment, maybe a suggestion, and they'd like to get that onto your agenda, can they do that? And if so, how do they go about achieving that?
They submit if they have a comment. There's many ways they can submit comments, let me put it that way. There is a Telecommunications Board web presence on the city, accessfayetteville.org, and it lists each of our names and phone numbers and email addresses, so any citizen could choose that process for having a agenda item named. The Cable Administration Office, under the management of Marvin Hilton, will accept any compliments or complaints regarding cable television services. He has a process that's defined for that, and then he will bring those to the board. Those are the primary ways to...
Well, there's also a live call-in during our board meetings.
Thank you,
If citizens want to comment on any issues before the board or raise those on their own, they can do that on a live call-in.
So again, the telecom board meetings are televised.
Right. And not only live call-in, but walk-in. You know, we've got citizen participation from people who come to the meetings.
I'd say that's a very valuable part in helping us do our job, too, is hearing comments, and it's almost without exception helpful and well-informed.
So you appreciate the feedback, is what you're saying?
Oh, yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. When you as a board want to take a certain action or craft a particular policy and you want that to go into effect, what do? Do you take a vote on it? How does that become reality?
Okay, I'll start. Just having fostered, for example, the process by which we established a new contract with public access television provider, Community Access, this station right here. So the typical way we go about it is that any one of the board members who has a particular interest or expertise in the topic will more or less volunteer or be assigned to volunteer as a subcommittee chairperson. So, for example, in the CAT contract negotiations, we would work offline in a subcommittee and bring recommendations for the contract terms to the full board. And then we would review and discuss and have a vote, make that recommendation then to city administration or city council, depending on the appropriate avenue.
Well, let's get down to, if you read the papers, if you watch the local news, programming on CAT is often, well, it can generate headlines. It can have reporters asking questions. So we've got some questions lined up about that. And I guess let's start off by asking you, what is your role as a board in determining the programming that the public sees on the government channel, the educational channel, and the public access channel?
We don't determine content. We facilitate establishing procedures and policies for how they operate, but we do not get involved in the selection of content.
And I don't think we should. I mean, it's very important, I think, that the government not act to censor content unless it's clearly illegal. One of the functions we have and I'm not sure we always do a good job on that, is educating the public about the rules of access. And in fact, it's become evident that we haven't even educated some of the city officials very well about that. And I think we can do a better job of explaining the purpose of access and the reason that it should allow citizens to speak in their own voice.
So that's a great point. Do each of you share the same view on that particular topic?
Sure.
I think the thing that we've done the most is the education part. People will come and complain, or there'll be a call-in or whatever, and we say, well, if it happens to deal with the public access channel, then have you gone to the board and followed their procedures of letting your feelings be known? Or if it's the government channel, have you gone to that group and talked to them about what's concerning you? Or have you gone to the educational channel and have you talked to them? Because we're sort of just at the top of this, and we're just working with the groups and making sure they follow their policies and informing people that there is a policy for each group, and if there's something you wanted to share with them, then here they are, here's who they are. And I think the meshing of the three access channels is maybe a little bit confusing in the fact that there are three distinct channels and they all have goals and they have regulations, and the public access has a different standing than any of the other two, I think.
Sure, and I mean there are programs on all three, both the public access and the educational government channel, that I choose not to watch just because I'm not interested. Not that I'm particularly offended, I'm just not interested in them. And I think it would be a disservice to the community if everything on all three of those channels was acceptable to everyone. That one of the things that should happen in the public sphere is a discussion and disagreement and an argument about issues and ideas, and that's what this provides.
And the content that's being selected by CAT, who the city has contracted for to run the public access channel, is not arbitrary. There are guidelines, federal guidelines and regulations about things relative to content, particularly when it comes to the things that are considered offensive or obscene. There's a difference there. And that's where there's this gray area that a lot of people, I don't believe, understand.
Now, Craig, you and Steve both said that the Telecom Board plays no part in determining the programming that goes on these channels. Let's take it a step further. Exactly what relationship does the city administration have in determining programming that we see on these channels?
They're not supposed to be involved in the day-to-day operational aspects of content selection either.
From what I've seen, it's more on a complaint basis. There would be a review, perhaps by the city attorney. You have to recall the basic parameters are around the freedom of speech and obscenity laws. And those interpretations, content as it is in compliance with or out of compliance with those standards or those laws, is not the board's determination. That's up to the judicial system.
And I'd also add that of the complaints that have been lodged about content, that in fact nothing's been aired has been found to be legally obscene. It's just that people don't like it or find it offensive. But I think that could be applied to. I mean, I hope they find something offensive on all the channels.
Yeah, speaking about that, for example, showing the city council meetings. I mean, that is. The government
highly
channel.
Offensive, right?
That is the government. That's the government channel, and I imagine the city has some participation in the fact that that's programming that appears on the government channel, because that's a government thing. The school board appears on the government channel, and I don't know if the city has anything to do with that, but that's a different thing than the public access. And if the city starts saying you can have this on the public access or you can have that on the public access, then I think that's a path they don't want to take, because that's not legal. Right. And public access is different than the government and the educational. And the programming content, whatever entity is controlling that has a policy, and that policy has been shared several times. But people who don't like what they see, if they don't want to change the channel, they can go talk to that entity and say, this is what's bothering me, and they can be informed. They're welcome to come to us, and we can tell them the same thing.
And the underlying rationale is different for the channels, too. I mean, both the government channel and the education channel should hopefully help inform citizens and be able to provide programming that's not commercially viable. I mean, you couldn't sell, I don't think you could sell too many ads for some of the programs on the government channel, although you might. Whereas the access channel is just that, it's access. It's primarily to give citizens an opportunity to speak and air their productions.
Gary, you were talking briefly about the city prosecutor. Let me throw a question toward all of you. Exactly what role does the city prosecutor play in deciding whether or not a public access program is, and I'm going to read this verbatim, obscene or otherwise unprotected speech that cannot be legally played on the public access channel? Does the prosecutor decide if this is dirty television we're watching?
Don, this last round that we've had with Kat is a little different than what we've had in the past. I don't recall discussions of the prosecuting attorney's role or the police role in our subcommittee meeting or by the Telecom board. And this is where we really need to have some discussions on what the role is for the prosecuting attorney and the police for criminal acts, which I understand. Now that's my limited, Catherine's here, discussion of what that means to go that route versus going the route through CAT and through the Telecom board. There's another, and I'll throw it back at you, on the commercial TV. Evidently that's a different route also when you go to obscenity on a commercial station. Now that's all my knowledge on it. But there are things that we haven't discussed. I've never discussed those.
Well, I think I mean, there has been some discussion on the Telecom board list, and in fact I think I was involved in part of that. I mean, unlike the Federal Communication Commission, which can receive complaints against station, their programming, and assess fines, that's not our function. We don't do that. And in fact, if someone wanted to allege that something was obscene and try to get it pulled without a judicial termination, I think they, especially if a city employee were involved in doing that, they would subject themselves to Section 1983 actions. So that going to the prosecutor and getting some kind of judicial determination on whether something is legally obscene is probably preferable to censoring it without that.
Steve, let me ask you this. Yeah. If somebody's watching a program and he or she thinks it is obscene, what would that person have to do to actually go about finding out if it is obscene? If somebody doesn't like it, what do they do about it?
Well, I mean, as a matter of what's a wise thing to do would start with the manager of the station and the board, but to get that determination, you could obtain a copy of the program, which are kept on file on tape here, and actually take it to the prosecutor's office. I don't imagine they would want to make that a major part of their business, but that would be and they would make a determination as to whether or not to bring charges, and then ultimately a jury would decide whether or not it's obscene.
Yeah, I think that's key. It's a community standard, and that it would, in the bottom line would be determined by the community whether that was. And so if you personally feel something's offensive, that doesn't mean it is. It just means it is to you. And so the community standard is variable between, say, Bentonville and Springdale and Rogers and Fayetteville. And so, but it's a personal individual's choice to choose that path to determine their offense, I guess. And so I would do as Steve says, to say go to the board of whichever entity it is and talk to them about what it is that is concerning you. And then if you wanted to sue, I guess you can sue. But it's not the city suing somebody. It's it's this person who feels that they're offended by something that they think is obscene.
So if I'm sitting back in my home and I've got my television set on, and I happen to be watching Abby of the Lemur, which I do from time to time, but if I see it, and it's the first time I've seen it, and something on the program I can't believe my eyes. This is on my cable system. This is on my television. What do? Do I pick up the phone and call Marvin the next day? Is that how I find out?
Yeah,
well, I have to go to the city attorney then, one way or the other?
Yeah, or you might just change the channel.
Yeah, if you choose to watch it, I mean, it's like you want to go out and you want to be an advocate for other people you think that are offended by this. And so, I mean, if it offends you personally, I'm not sure why you're looking at it. It's like I'll watch the evening news, for example, and I don't like what they're talking about, so I'll just change it to another evening news station to watch them for a while. So I mean, that would be one path. But if you think that you need to go on a crusade, then that would be, I would go to the board of the group that is doing that, whether it's the public access or Channel 5 or the government access or whatever.
Or come down here and make a show and be on the air yourself and voice your...
So you compete, the speech that you don't like, try to block it out with your own speech.
Why not? I mean, just come express yourselves here at the, make your own show.
What a radical concept.
No, if I could answer that also, there's something that I think you as a viewer need to ask yourself. Am I insulted by this? And if you are, set that aside and then ask yourself this question, do I think this is illegal? Do I think there's a crime being made? Is the law being broken? If you believe the latter, then I think it's your responsibility to look into it. And of course, look into it by calling Marvin. Marvin Hilton would be a good person to talk to. Kat has also got Sky Blaylock, is that right? And Sky can listen to the complaint, perhaps explain some of the standards of freedom of speech and censorship and those things to better educate the person who had sensitivity to it. But if you think a law has been broken, then I think Steve said it, that you should come down and get a copy and take it to the prosecutor's office. By no means are we trying to create a branch of your local video store down at the prosecutor's office. But those processes are there. And I'd make the other comment, more broadly speaking, I think the Telecom Board's job is to provide access for the airing of content, not reduce the content.
Do you, excuse me, do you actually get, I mean, I think the public perception maybe when we see stories about is this program or that program obscene, the city attorney has become involved, he's seeking an opinion, we hear complaints. I think sometimes people may take that and think, wow, this Telecom Board, maybe the cat, there's a lot of problems here. How many complaints do you get about your programming? Is it, I mean, are we like watching a scene from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington when they haul in bags of mail each time you get together, or is it just one or two?
It's one or two, and usually by the same one or two offended individuals.
Well, on content, I think we get a lot of concerns, more than that. I mean, not a lot, but about the cable system and,
that's different.
Yeah, we
pricing and
more related to Cox than we do with Cat.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Is that part of what we do is to make sure that these groups follow their policy. Part of it's education of people who have complaints, but a lot of our time is consumed with people who call up and say, well, why'd you move the NASA channel out of my tier, because I like to watch the NASA channel, or why did they increase my bill at Cox? Are you going to get some money from Cox for the high-speed internet access? Things like that. And so those are I think, a majority of what we deal with, and just rarely when somebody happens to be up late at night watching something on TV will we deal with those other issues.
Did you get a lot of questions about the decision to move ESPN?
We're beginning
I haven't
to.
heard anything yet.
Well,
we are.
we are
still-
beginning to.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we just had the announcement at the last board meeting about what those program rate and channel changes were going to be. So
Cox, of course, Cox Cable deciding that the folks that provide ESPN are charging too much, so they're going to bump it up to a higher level of service, a higher bill,
Right.
and reduce the basic service rate by
60 cents.
60 cents. So big savings there.
Though
Yeah.
the per customer cost for that show, I believe, is like $2.60. So there's a little inequity there.
Yeah, I'd point out this time that the cable service in the city of Fayetteville is not provided by the government. It's a private business, and although it in fact is, or de facto is, and certainly acts as if it's a monopoly, it's not a regulated monopoly in terms of other public utilities that we would be able to negotiate on each issue. That a lot of that's been preempted by federal legislation during the last decade. And the place we can have input is in the franchise agreement, which has expired quite some time ago. It's continuing on a month-to-month basis, and there are varying opinions as to the good faith involved in negotiations for renewal of a contract.
So I would imagine that as a board you find yourself doing a lot of that, a lot of contract negotiation.
Well, we have professional staff that does that, but we advise and suggest things that be included in the franchise agreement. It's just that private businesses don't always jump at the opportunity to do things in public service that cost them money.
Yeah, not in my experience. Let's talk about something else here. I'm guessing this is what we're talking about here, and I think everyone has one. Not being an attorney, it looks like legislative material to me, but as I clear my throat, and I hate to do that into the mic, but bear with me. The ordinance that set up your board has two main sections. The first part lists the items that the board is to advise the city council about. The second section lists the duties that the city council has delegated as autonomous authority for the board to perform. So let's talk about what the board is supposed to advise, or how they're supposed to advise the city council. Let's just start off. What is the role of your board in advising the council about the cable franchising process?
Well, ours is a recommendation in that, and the guidelines that we suggest they pursue. But it's negotiations are being carried on by city employees and outside counsel with Cox. So, if they get a final agreement, we would make a recommendation on that to the city council.
Do you advise on anything else? Telephone, internet, satellite service, any kind of things like that?
Well,
I'm seeing you smiling there.
No. I mean, I think the telecommunication infrastructure is important, and ranging from telecommunication services for city government to looking at a master plan for the city on that. But it's not an area that we've developed policy on to date. It's part of the new expansion of the Telecommunication Board and the new ordinance.
I think this task force will help crystallize that for us, but that's something we're dealing with. For example, the Cox infrastructure that they have now, they can send high-speed internet or have that access, as opposed to Southwestern Bell or maybe some wireless group that wants to hook up and provide. And does that come under our purview, or is it something else, or whatever? And then that complicates the issue with the Cox negotiation. Should that be part of what we're asking the city to provide, high-speed internet to each house, and then who would provide that, and would Cox be just automatically assumed to be the person who takes care of that, and would the city get a piece of the action on that or not? Or
you just mentioned a task force. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, we voted in our last group to send a proposal to the city, and I don't know, Susan, you said the city was ready to.
That the City Council will hear next Tuesday night a recommendation for appointing a task force, very limited in scope, around, like Steve mentioned, strategic planning for the infrastructure in the city. And so that would, I say limited in scope, that's a huge scope, but that would include reviewing other types of contracts for telecommunication services and getting groups together to study the most appropriate type of telecommunication services, whether it, for broadband basically, whether it be cable or wireless or other kinds of things. But the city has recognized its need for a strategic plan.
Well, one of the greatest challenges, Don, is technology is changing so tremendously fast. We're in a digital age, and I'm just starting to get a hold of what digital means. Digital in terms of a service provider, a Cox, a phone company, a satellite company, means not only does your traditional service get facilitated to the end user better, clearer, with more quality, but then you have all kinds of additional opportunities, particularly with the Telecom Act of '96. A lot of these companies can get into other services. It very well could be someday that the phone company could be offering telephone, internet, which they do now, but also video, television. I was watching television last night and saw, I don't recall the name of the city, but it's a city-owned, in this case, entity that's offering phone service, electrical service, internet service, and cable TV service. And that's one of the greatest challenges that the Telecom Board has in my mind, is to try to predict who will have what, where, and what it means relative to the citizens of Fayetteville, and how does Fayetteville's relationship with these entities do the best for the community in terms of providing things like community access television and providing funding, franchise fees, and things like that. I mean, in my mind, it's a tremendous challenge.
So as the technology advances, you are going to have your plates full.
You bet.
Yeah, and it's changing a lot, and there are regulations that differ depending upon which type of service it is, and we're actually in the process of learning what some of those things mean to us. What can we have some control over and say over? Cox, for example, is providing telephone services in some communities already. And does that fit into the franchise renewal? Is there franchise fees associated with that? We don't know yet.
Right.
So
Plus
that's part of what the task force is going to try to learn.
Conflicting jurisdictions between the Federal Communications Commission and the State Public Service Commission that regulate different types of utilities. And then what we do, based at least primarily on the right-of-way and the franchise fee there. Another thing that the board should be doing, I think, is looking at the distribution of that franchise fee and how we use that to support the public educational and government access channels, and be involved in that budget process. And I think the council would welcome our participation in that.
Are any of you attorneys, just offhand? Have you thought about maybe going back to school? It sounds like you've got really a lot to look at.
I think one of the things that's scary to me is that I guess the current contract with Cox is like from 1989 or something, and if when we renew it may be another 30-year contract. And if you think about the growth of technology since through the 90s and now, that you're making commitment to some kind of technological interaction with this entity that will be so different in 10 years.
And Cox would like for us to make it as long as possible, but I think it's pretty much the mood of not only this board but also city administration that no more than 5 years could be possible given that changing.
Well, and also, I mean, there's also the possibility that Cox and the city can't agree on
Right.
on what should be
That's
provided. And in that case, this board would have an even larger responsibility in deciding the future of distribution in the system.
There was, when I first got interested in this with David and Catherine, set up a needs and interest study, and that was back in '96 or '97. And the whole franchising formal process, as I understand, informal and formal, is based on the needs and interest study of the community. And this has changed. The night that we had the first public hearing on it, we thought we'd hear a lot about television. It wasn't about television. It was about what you had just said, what's coming, the people who know what's out there in broadband and digital. Mm-hmm. And there was one person that talked about TV that night, the rest, everybody else. And then these folks did a tremendous needs and interest study that is now 7 years old. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think the task force will be useful, is to obtain a better idea of what the community is thinking now. Mm-hmm. And the community may have grown. I mean, in several senses, uses of technology, but what do you mean by a virtual community? Mm-hmm. Yeah, anyway, but those are really interesting questions.
A lot of money, obviously, on the table in terms of all of these things and contracts and franchises. Let's talk a little bit about money. What actually is the role of the board in the funding of the 3 channels? Do you determine funding levels? How do you handle the bookkeeping?
We make recommendations, but so far we haven't. This year was the first time. Okay, let me back up. This board has changed from year to year. We've not had the same board through a budget cycle, and so it's been a little discontiguous, our efforts in impacting the budget process with city administration. So what we would like to do, and hope we'll do it next year in a better fashion, is be involved in the timetable that is set for all city negotiations for budget, and then have more of an opportunity to make recommendations about the equipment, and as Steve said, also about how the revenues from the franchise come in and are spent by the city. So the answer is we haven't really been as involved as we need to be.
Right. I mean, there's a considerable amount of revenue comes in from the franchise fees for the cable, far more than spent on the PEG channels. And I think there's some policy differences in that some city government would like to have that as general revenue to spend on any other project, but you could give each of those, the public access channel, the educational channel, the government channel, $100,000 budget each, and still have money left over for general revenues. But that's a policy question that'll be decided by the city council, but we can make advisory comments on it.
So how do you go about, as a board, getting an item put on the city council agenda?
Well, our recent experience has been that Alderman Marr and Jordan have, since they participated this summer with the ad hoc committee at the mayor's request, they are more familiar with our issues, and they're eminently approachable if they agree. Also, of course, city administration, Mr. Ernest, is very helpful in bringing issues that we need to the city council. So those 2 avenues are helpful to us. We also have an opportunity and a requirement from the ordinance that we report to the council regularly with issues. I think it's quarterly. They ask for a written report from us.
Let me ask you a quick policy question. There are apparently 2 website policies. One was written by city staff, and the other you folks put together. Which is it? Which one's valid?
Ours.
Guess
I guess
he's on.
Sure. I don't know. I guess they have to mesh together some way. So I would imagine they've been vetted in such a way that they don't conflict. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, we're not finished. I mean,
Yeah.
we started looking at them, and there are 2 different purposes. When you say one that you did, nobody here did that one. So, like I said, the board has been reconstituted. So, institutional memory is somewhat short on the web policy. But I think that the city established a website policy that was a guideline for employees and how they actually produce documents. Totally different purpose than what the board in the past devised as a website policy that had more to do with higher level policy and content and open records issues and those kinds of things. So they do not, they're not, they didn't have the same audience, and they are not baked, either one of them.
There are some differences in what we're doing with our portion of the city's website and what some of the other things are done, like take the neighborhood associations, for example. You'll have people that are set up so that they can post information on the website relative to their neighborhood. That content is all reviewed by city staff people before it's ever put out there. One piece of our website is to what's called a listserv that has all of our email correspondence. It's not edited. The city staff doesn't review it. So you can go to our website and take that link, and you can review all of the electronic mail correspondence that we've had. And so that's a deviation from the way the city's doing a lot of their stuff on their website.
And for example, there's I would like on our website to have streaming video of certain conversations that we have. For example, we had a conversation about Cox changing the level of service for customers without telling them, and then finding out that they send a letter that says, if you don't call me, we're going to change your service and bill you more. And so we have, a nice little discussion about what that means, and that we talked about it, and that we told Cox or whatever. So I'd like that video clip to be on the website. And but the government has a policy that you can't edit any government meeting; it has to be shown in its entirety. So if you were going to put the whole meeting, you have to put the whole meeting on to get that clip. And so I don't know that, don't know where we'll come off on that, but I don't see any harm in showing clips of conversations and not just having people have to go through the the whole hour or 2 hours of stuff that doesn't make any sense. And it would be a sort of like a random access video that you would be able to get to pieces that have some meaning. So we might be able to meet both standards, or we might have to ask for special consideration for our policy.
David brings up a good point about webcasting, and that's something that I feel is, as time goes by, is going to become more and more and more important to access by community access television. In other words, people's content being not only aired over cable channel, but on the web. And I think we need to look at what that means. We talked a few minutes ago about the digital world. The lines between cable and the internet are becoming grayer and grayer all the time, between all types of transmissions, the telephone, the cable signal, TV cable signal, the cellular phones. All of these things are really converging with more and more over time common technologies, and it's an internet technology. Long story short, I think one of our challenges as a board is to say, what does this mean to community access television? And Steve made the point early in our program that it is community access television is television is maybe a dated term. I don't know. It's community access communications. And if you look at it from that perspective, from the communications perspective, then you need to look at it also in terms of communications mediums. And I think the internet is by far, and I think everybody would agree, the growing mode of communications. And I think that we need to look at that too. Is that for tomorrow? No. But is it in the future? Absolutely.
You're the Bill Gates of the group.
Along the same lines, what we're presently doing with PEG is we're using television, well, particularly with the public access channel. That's just sort of a current day version of the soapbox up at the town square. So instead of going there and just the people that are driving around the square can hear you, now we've got television. So using the internet as another vehicle is just another step in providing that same sort of process.
Let me ask a final question, and I'll put it to each of you, and if we could kind of finish up the way we started at my left, and we'll go around the table, and I'm going to be a bad journalist here and make it a two-parter for you. I would say if you would tell us what you think the biggest challenge for the telecom board and for CAT is, in your opinion, and secondly, let me know where you stand on terms of the freedom of speech and the content issues. Does public access TV go too far sometimes? Should it step back from controversial program, or do you think that we should just go ahead and you know, make it kind of an open free-for-all? And I'm trying not to, you know, bookend the question, but Gary, let me start with you. Two parts.
Well, I think it should be pretty evident by my comments heretofore that technology is our biggest challenge from my perspective, and that's something that was my interest in wanting to participate in the board overall, was just technology. And with that, I'll go on to the second part of the question, and I'll elaborate a little more on a comment I made earlier. I feel it's my job as a telecom board member to facilitate communications content onto these different channels and in these mediums. It's not to take it down. It's somebody else's job to take it down. That's the judicial system's job to interpret what freedom of speech is and what it's not, what obscenity is and what it's not.
Okay, greatest challenge. Well, to follow on Gary's comments about the technology and the media convergence, our challenge is to do the right homework to be able to then articulate back to the City Council about their decisions with funding. So just staying on top of the technology, but also educating council members. That's a big challenge. Content. I served on the committee that helped write the contract for community access television. And it's just as clear as it can be, first come, first serve, non-discriminatory, and as far as the board's concerned, that's all we should care. Is it first come, first serve, non-discriminatory access to the station? And that's what the contract allows, and that's what I'm here for, too.
Yeah, I really appreciate what both of y'all have said in terms of the, you know, the technical part of it and the convergence. There's a legal aspect of it that I don't have a grasp of what's occurring at the FCC levels. And Steve, I hope you'll touch on that and how the laws are changing and how we're really losing at that level some rights that I've always thought we had. And so that's the biggest challenge, and I don't even know how to articulate it quickly, but that's one. And then how do we bring the public, bring the energies together in this community to really make a difference in conserving what we've already got. I'm really concerned about that. That's it.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern is for us to try to secure and ensure the PEG channels. That is, I think that we need to do whatever we can to let everybody know that those three things are important, that we need to make sure they're funded to a level that they can succeed, and then partially, as part of the second question, is to educate people as to what they are and why we need them. And then in terms of content, as a board member, I don't have anything to say about content. So just personally, I'd just say that if someone's offended by something on the public access channel, then come down and make a show talking about whatever you want to talk about, or turn the channel.
In terms of the challenges for us, I think after we get over this hump with what we do with the franchise renewal, that it's going to have to be on the other technologies that are available. And I think the biggest part's not what technologies work or not, it's what as Jim said, what those regulations will let us do relative to that sort of thing. I don't understand a lot of that right now. And I think that we're going to go through more of a learning process to figure out what the city can do or not do relative to these other infrastructure type options. To the content on CAT, I think the fact that Fayetteville has a public access channel says something positive about Fayetteville. I think it's important that we continue to have that, because if we want for Fayetteville to continue being what Fayetteville has been, and that we don't want to get into the content management business on that.
Well, I agree with what everyone else has said generally, is that anticipating the telecommunication needs of both the government and the citizens and making that available and accessible and affordable. But I don't want, I mean, a lot of our conversation here has been sort of about conflict and problems, and I can't quite let that go by. I mean, although some cities in Arkansas have better cable systems than we have access to here, we have by far, I think, the best government and public access channels in the state, and a very competent staff, both in the cable administrator Marvin Hilton as well as the folks at CAT. So we're quite fortunate in that area. In terms of the content, I mean, I think that issue has been highlighted, and the reason we need public access by the decision this week from CBS Corporate to prohibit the showing of an ad during the Super Bowl. I mean, the sponsors were willing to pay $1.5 million for a 30-second ad, and CBS said it was controversial.
It's the MoveOn.org
Right.
political ad.
Right. And that's what corporations do. They decide what programming they want, and if they're not interested in what you have, or they think it's controversial, they can reject it. So you can't even buy it with $1.5 million. But access, public access, allows people to express their opinions. And I wish that there were even more provocative programs about politics and the future of our community than there are now.
Almost the final word. Almost, but I'm going to grab that one for myself. We hope, as you've been watching this, it has helped you to get to know the telecom board members a little bit more personally, giving you a bit of insight into their viewpoints, what they see as the biggest challenges facing both themselves and the city as technology continues to become a huge concern. It is, has been, will always be, and we hope we manage to educate you a little bit more on their duties, responsibilities. We may have rambled a bit. It is cable access television. Cut us a break, but we are glad you joined us, and have a very pleasant day. Thank you.